שיר למעלות, אשא עיניי אל ההרים, מאין יבוא עזרי, עזרי מעם השם, עושה שמיים וארץ, אל ייתן למות רגליך, אל ינום שומרך, הנה לא ינום ולא ישן שומר ישראל, השם שומרך, השם צילך, על יד ימינך. יומם השמש לא יככה וירח בלילה, השם ישמורך מכל רע, ישמור את נפשך, השם ישמור צאתך ובואך מעתה ועד עולם. שיר למעלות, אשא עיניי אל ההרים, מאין יבוא עזרי, עזרי מעם השם, עושה שמיים וארץ, אל ייתן למות רגליך, אל ינום שומרך, הנה לא ינום ולא ישן שומר ישראל, השם שומרך, השם צילך, על יד ימינך.
Okay, shalom everybody, shalom and shavua tov, and welcome to podcast number 6 of the World Alliance of Qara'im. We have a very interesting and I think fascinating discussion / debate that will begin in just a couple of minutes. I'll bring our guests on in just a moment or so, but let's talk a bit about what this discussion / debate is going to be, about what it's going to be. And the title of the debate is the New Testament's conception of Jesus compatible with the Tanakh? And presenting the pro side, we have our guest Jonathan Bailey, and presenting the con side, we have James Campbell, who has been on previously. So let me bring the guests on right now. And let's just set this up correctly. I think that works. Okay. Hey, guys. Hello, James. Hello, Jonathan.
Hello.
Hi, guys. All right. So let me give a little bit of a background here. So we have Jonathan Bailey on the right. I don't know if you guys want to. Let me actually remove this right there. Okay. Good. So now we can see who everybody is. So let's start with Jonathan. So Jonathan is a self-published author, blogger, and international bicycle tourer who writes and speaks about the relationship of the New Testament to Jewish literature and religion, Kabbalah, and Jungian synchronicity. He's currently residing in Cyprus and manages the website houseofadesertvoice.org. And Jonathan and I have known each other for a number of years. Now we met online, and then while I was living in Portugal, Jonathan happened to be doing part of his bike trip through Portugal, and we met up, and good times were had by all. And also we have here James Campbell. James has been on before, as I mentioned, and James is a research associate with us with the World Alliance of Qara'im. So he has having Jewish lineage, I'll just read the blurb, having Jewish lineage, but raised Catholic in the Dominican Republic and in Southern California. James has become adept at arguing against Christian ideology, which he frequently does online on various online forums. James is currently attending college in the Los Angeles area with the ultimate goal of attaining a Master of Divinity degree. So welcome, guys. As Jonathan being the guest, I guess being his first time on the podcast, I'm going to let him start off with a statement. So I anticipate that this is going to be a bit more of a debate, maybe even a bit contentious, but let's please try to keep it civil and polite, of course, and let's stick to the facts. And I will pretty much serve during this podcast pretty much as the moderator and the verse poster, and I will maybe throw in my 2 cents here and there, but really I'm going to let James and Jonathan go at it. We don't have a formal structure for the debate, but I'll moderate and make sure that things don't get out of control. So if I feel that one side is filibustering or is not responding to the issues being posed by the other side, then I will jump in at that point and try to make some order out of the chaos. But these are two very talented and knowledgeable people in their respective points of view. So I have a feeling that it's going to go pretty smoothly with little interruption from me. So with that being said, let's bring on Jonathan. Jonathan Bailey, you can start and give us an overview of who you are, I guess, and your background and what your relationship is or what your belief is regarding Jesus and the New Testament.
Well, I don't really actually make dogmatic assertions publicly about like I'm this, I'm that, associate me with this group, associate me with that group. This is what I believe about that sort of stuff publicly. I talk about that sort of thing with friends privately or people who need to know, stuff like that. I don't hide things, but I kind of take a Jordan Peterson approach. I don't know if you are familiar with that guy, but he's
I think we all are.
Psychologist and philosopher. He's a conservative. He's a conservative psychologist and philosopher, and he's associated a lot with Catholicism. Because his wife is Catholic, but he never actually says I'm Catholic or not. People ask him, and he just doesn't say that because he wants people to just evaluate what he says rather than put him into a particular group. And so with that, I was just going to tackle the question of whether the New Testament is compatible with the Tanakh. Now, in that, without saying anything about what I believe about this or that or what group I'm associated with, I do believe if we take the New Testament, at its face, that it is. And so I guess if this is going to be a debate formatted kind of an interview, then I'm willing to take that position. The New Testament, of course, is like I'm talking about the 27 books that are universally accepted by Catholicism and Protestantism and the world at large. So not including the Book of Enoch or whatever that's, part of the New Testament of the Ethiopian church or any odd body like that. And that's the content of the Gospels, the 4 Gospels, and then the various epistles and the Book of Acts and the Book of Revelation by the 8 authors of the New Testament that are historically known or accepted. So that's what I'm talking about. It's a very broad question. Is the New Testament compatible with the Tanakh? So there's really a lot of ways that we can go with it. Now, I just, hearing the introduction, I would assume that James thinks that it's not. Just going from that open statement that he thinks that it's not. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. So then I guess from there, the first thing I'd like to ask is why not?
Well, I believe that the New Testament breaks what you'd call changes in theology, in my opinion. For example, it universalizes what you'd call the covenant, and from what I can remember, it applies Tanakh a certain way that sometimes brings it out of what you'd say is its historical context. in order to make a point. And the thing that I kind of looked into this a lot, like not just with Christianity, but with other religions that claim to like fulfill like Judaism or like Christianity. And like there's a lot of religions that make claims like this where they say, oh, we're like the fulfillment of this and that. But I've always believed that you need to test the claims that a religion makes or a scripture makes in order to actually see if it like historically fulfills or aligns scripturally with the original like revelation. If that makes sense.
So what you're saying is that it's incompatible with the Tanakh because what it makes claims about prophecies, and you don't believe that the Tanakh is actually prophesying what it's saying?
Well, I believe that it makes claims and it applies them to Jesus, but at the same time, it doesn't. It like I'm trying to like formulate exactly what my point is here, so it doesn't just sound like I'm just like rattling on. So basically, like for example, right? Like out of Egypt, I called my son.
Mhm.
I don't remember exactly what verse that is, but I believe it is in Hosea, and I believe it is Matthew applies it to Jesus, and he just quotes, "Out of Egypt I called my son." But before this, right before this in the Tanakh, it says, "When Israel was a child, I loved him." So it's things like that that for me, like I don't personally think that it aligns very well because I've seen that that's kind of like consistently what they do. I'm not going to say like that they're like doing this out of malice or something like that. Like due to the research I've done, I don't doubt like broadly, I don't doubt their sincerity, but I don't believe that sincerity automatically equals truth because every religion out there is probably completely sincere, or at least the people that founded them for the most part. But you can't like accept literally every single one of them as truth equally. So what I've done is I've kind of just like test the claims that it makes off of scripture, like the scripture that it claims to fulfill. And I just personally don't agree with it, with the claims that it makes if you take the original revelation into context.
Okay, so I guess if we have this conversation, then what we're going to have a conversation about, like whether that applies to Jesus, right?
Yeah, I
Um,
guess so.
okay, so I am not familiar exactly with what the accepted parameters of Karaism are, or what the World Alliance of Qara'im accepts as being Jewish. There are the New Testament is making a lot of assertions that are compatible with what I would consider Judaism, because this same sort of analysis is being done by rabbis and who don't know anything about Jesus, right? Are you familiar, for instance, with the Pardes analysis, right? The
Yes.
Pshat, okay, right. Yeah, Pshat, Remesh, Drash, and Sod.
So let me
Okay,
just
so
break in for a second, Jonathan, and say that, yeah, all of that. I watch a certain guy on YouTube a lot. He is actually identifies as a Catholic. Should I mention his name? Yeah, I'll mention his name. His name is Ashmez, former Chabadnik, who I guess many years ago or a number of years ago became a Catholic. And I would say most of his videos, they take the approach. He tries to defend Christianity and specifically Catholicism. And the approach he generally takes is so he is trying to do outreach mostly to Jews, rabbinical Jews. And the approach he takes is that Christianity is a lot more compatible with rabbinical Judaism than one might think. And I agree with that. I agree with that. I think both Christianity and rabbinical Judaism grew out of, the Greco-Roman / Hellenistic world. And so when Ashmez tries to target Jews, he usually uses that approach. He goes to early rabbinical writings, later rabbinical writings, and so on. My point is that here in this debate, that ain't going to work, right? As Karaites, we do not accept any of the rabbinical writings as canonical. That's not to say that some of the statements of the rabbis don't have truth and wisdom to them, but as a body, we reject that. So if you're going to take that approach, or if you're going to try to prove the truth of the New Testament by using rabbinical Jewish sources, then that may work with rabbinical Jews, but specifically here, in the case of Tanach-only Karaites, that ain't going to work. So I hope that clarifies your question.
So are you moderating, or are you a participant in this?
I'm moderating. I'm moderating.
Because that seems like that was a little bit more than moderation.
Well, I mean, I
like,
identify as a Karaite, and James identifies as a Karaite. So I don't hide my position, and James is not hiding his position. I was just trying to bring clarity to the structure of the debate. I'm moderating.
But I would like to actually talk with James
Go for it.
on that. Okay. All right. Thank you.
You do that.
So the New Testament basically is using rabbinic, established rabbinic analysis to apply, for instance, the out of Egypt I called my son, to apply it to Jesus, in that there's a common pattern. So it's not, the New Testament isn't specifically claiming that Hosea knew that he was talking about Jesus and predicting Jesus coming when he said, out of Egypt I called my son. It's just that somebody looked at the life of Jesus and noticed that he went to Egypt and then he left Egypt, and that act is a common pattern with that verse that was spoken of in the Bible, out of Egypt, or in the Tanakh, out of Egypt I called my son. Well, lo and behold, Jesus was in Egypt and left Egypt. So therefore, they think that there's an application there. It doesn't really require a historical context. For instance, there's the verse in Isaiah which says, before the child knew good from evil, right? Well, apparently according to the New Testament, Jesus knew good from evil, as soon as he was alive, or as soon as he could think, or as soon as he could express it. So there's actually a difference there. In terms of the, and I'd actually want to pull those verses up, but there are, when it talks about, and a young woman shall conceive, and a virgin shall conceive. And in there are differences between what happened with Jesus, but it is a common pattern that they say Jesus resembles, or he applies to all of these verses. So it's looser. It doesn't really require Isaiah, when he's saying this, has no earthly idea about Jesus, right? The New Testament isn't really claiming that Isaiah knows that. He's just saying that there's a common pattern here. And so that Jesus fits the general pattern of what's being discussed, even though this or that detail might be, it does seem pretty obvious that Isaiah was talking about someone else. We don't know who Isaiah was talking about, but there's the pattern of this young individual born of a virgin, who will then be called, mighty counselor, and God is with us, and, wonderful, and all of this stuff, which resembles Jesus, because Jesus has been called God is with us. Jesus has been called, mighty counselor, and all of that sort of stuff. So I think when people look at prophecies, they are demanding that the defender of the New Testament or the New Testament author is making the claim that Isaiah had Jesus of Nazareth in mind when he said that thing, but that is not necessarily the case. It's that he's fulfilling the common pattern. It's the remes analysis, and it's allegorization, stuff like that. So I don't know. I mean, when it comes to these, well, the New Testament can't have anything to do with the Tanakh because the prophecies are taken out of context. Well, a prophecy doesn't require context in the first place. And then second, even if the prophecies are taken out of context, I don't see how the New Testament would be incompatible with the Tanakh. I thought really when we think about whether the New Testament concept of Jesus could be compatible with the Tanakh, we would be talking more along the lines of, well, does the New Testament say that Jesus is the Messiah? Does the New Testament say that Jesus is the Son of God? What does the Tanakh say about the Messiah? What does the Tanakh say about the Son of God? Things like that. That sort of stuff is what I thought we would be talking about here. But I guess explain to me why it would be necessary for Hosea to know that out of Egypt I call my son is a direct reference to Jesus. Why is that a necessity for compatibility of the New Testament with the Tanakh?
Well, I'm just gonna ask you like a question like that. I think this question would be able to answer it. So since you explicitly said that prophecies do not require context, right? To be understood or like to be reapplied. What's stopping me from applying Tanakh verses out of context to literally any historical figure that I want and then claiming that this person is the Messiah? What's stopping me from doing this if I'm not allowed to be constrained by the context of the verse or the referent of the verse?
Well, the pattern. For instance, whoever was spoken of by Hosea, was called out of Egypt and as the Son of God. Okay. And Jesus was called out of Egypt, and the New Testament says that he's the Son of God. So therefore, you need somebody who's called out of Egypt, out of Egypt I have called my son. So you need somebody who was called out of Egypt and was called the Son of God in order to fit that. So my Aunt Jenny was never in Egypt and was never called the Son of God. So that can't really be applied to her.
Okay, but Hosea 11, first of all, is not a prophecy, and second of all, it explicitly says that the child here is Egypt, and they're applying my son to Israel. So my problem isn't that people can apply it in this way. Like you're free to apply it however you want, but at the same time, like I'm free to ask, where from within the Tanakh do you get the justification to do this? Because as I said, I can apply plenty of verses in the Tanakh to literally any historical figure I want. If you want, I can. A few months ago, I think I was telling this to Melech a little while ago on the last podcast. I actually built a profile for Augustus Caesar doing the same hermeneutic style that the people that follow the New Testament did when they were applying these things to Jesus, and it worked out perfectly fine. But I just want to see, like, what would you think is like your justification for doing this? Because at the end of the day, if you're just taking isolated verses or isolated words and applying them to somebody that you think could fit, then what would be stopping me from arbitrarily applying it to somebody else?
Well, again, okay, so you understand a metaphor. It's literary analysis, right? So in Animal Farm, okay, I guess I'll go back and say, okay, so Metaphor has two parts. It has the tenor and the ground. So the tenor is the thing represented, and the ground is what it does the representing. So in the book Animal Farm, for instance, you have the pigs that they represent the bourgeoisie. So the pigs are the ground and the bourgeoisie are the tenors. The horses represent the proletariat. Okay, so the horses are the ground and the proletariat is the tenor. The dogs are the Gestapo, the fascists, and so again, you have dogs ground, Gestapo is the tenor. So what you have in these, it's literally, because you even said, it's like the verse in Hosea is not even a prophecy. And so for one, we might need to define exactly what a prophecy is. But for two, there's just literary analysis, so that we'll say certain things like, and have you ever heard of the term typology?
Yes, I know what
Okay.
typology is.
Okay, so that basically typology is a form of metaphorical analysis. It's literary analysis. It's allegorization. Okay, so then we'll say and you see this a lot of time, and it gets called Jesus-colored goggles, right? By people who don't like the standard Christian interpretations of these prophecies or of these things. But they'll say that, for instance, King Saul. And this has to do with the rabbinic notion, a rabbinic concept of as above, so below, that things that happen on earth correspond to things that happen in heaven. So they'll say that King Saul was the original king, but that he was disobedient and he lost his birthright or his anointing. And that King David was anointed in his place. Okay, so you look at that and you would see that you could say that would correspond to the devil being the prince of the original prince of the angels, but then he was cast out, and the Messiah became the king of the angels later on. That's also why statements about the king of Babylon are applied to Satan. There are, it's a type of literary analysis that's being spoken of here, and what the New Testament authors are saying. So again, King Saul is the ground, and Satan, or Samael, or Azazel, however he's described, is the tenor. Okay, and that David is the ground, and the Messiah is the tenor. So you can say that thing about King Saul and King David, that's not even a prophecy, because I think you're thinking of a prophecy as being a definitive statement about the future, when a prophecy really is simply an elucidation of a divine mystery. We talk about like in the Tanakh, you have multiple prophets of Baal, multiple prophets of Yahweh. Obadiah had 50 prophets of Yahweh, and you see a prophet really originally was something along the lines of a preacher. It wasn't necessarily these high order prophets that we have that actually had their writings turned into scripture, who actually were able to make certain predictions about the future. Jeremiah predicted that the Babylonians would come. That was one of his prophecies. But a prophecy is not necessarily limited to that. Okay, a prophecy is just an elucidation of a mystery. And so this type of analysis, we could say that this description of what happened between Samuel, Saul, and David, where Samuel got kicked out. And that's the same type of pattern, actually, as the original firstborn being Esau, and then losing his birthright and being replaced by Jacob. Okay, so it's a common pattern that you find where Saul and David corresponds to Esau and Jacob, right? That sort of thing. And so what the New Testament authors are saying, that Jesus actually fits into the picture by conforming to a lot of these patterns. And a lot of times it's not in every little detail, but because, for instance, in Isaiah 7, the mighty counselor, the Emmanuel, it says, before he knows what good or evil is. Well, according to the New Testament, Jesus knew what good or evil was before the universe was created, because he was pre-incarnate. So there can be little differences here, but
okay, Jonathan, wrap up your point, please, so we can let James respond. Okay, I want to make this a bit more balanced.
I'm probably getting a little repetitive here, but I do. So I guess I'll just finish. Do you see where I'm going with it? Do you see what I'm trying to say, James?
Yeah, like I understand like what you do, like in order to reach like the conclusions that you have. But my question from before was like, I understand like what you do, like interpretively, like I'm not going to say that like that you're like absolutely wrong or something like that. Like I disagree like really strongly, but at the same time, like I just need to ask, like, I understand what you do, and I understand that you said that like not all statements need to be within context to be like attributed to the NT. And that I know what typology is, obviously, but where do you get the statement from, oh, this is an interesting thought experiment, or this is an interesting thing that I can think about? But where do you get that to this is what's really meant to be? Because if all you have is like a future book that within context is not pointed to by the older book, then why should I trust the newer book's interpretations when I can see that they're not really within context agreed with or pointed to within the old? Because
if I could add one thing, sorry, again, I'm going to try to let you guys talk as much as possible. How is there any proof, Jonathan, since the New Testament was written chronologically later than the Old Testament, it already had all of the Old Testament as its text, and it could easily write into the New Testament, or the New Testament can easily write into the text stories which seem to fulfill the prophecies of the Old Testament. In other words, there's no way to prove in any way, shape, or form that these stories are real, or whether they're real, or whether they are just written to make the stories in the New Testament compatible with those of the Old Testament.
Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and deal with James here, and just have you be the moderator. Like, for instance, I'm not arguing that you said I was going a little bit long. I need to wrap it up. But I just want to have the conversation with James. So if I could get James to say again what he was saying so I can address that point, I would appreciate it.
okay, so my general point was before, like as I think Melech said before, I was raised Catholic. Like I was raised within like the world of like the New Testament. I got the First Communion. I took the catechism. I had plenty of Christian theological study in order to do this, so I understand like this world generally. And I just want to say, like, where from within the Tanakh do you, like, how do you say, like, where do you get it from? This is an interesting like thought experiment from this new book, to like, oh, this is the truth. Like, for example, like the Gnostic texts, I've also read those. They also claim to reveal the deeper meaning of what's inside of the New Testament due to a few New Testament passages that are kind of like anti-world, I guess you'd say. But within the New Testament, this doesn't work, because if you look at the whole thing within context, it doesn't really work within Gnosticism, in my opinion. But like, where do you justify the jump from the contextual meaning of the Tanakh to context isn't necessarily needed, and the meaning of what the Tanakh says isn't necessarily needed to be perfect, to this definitely talks about Jesus in the New Testament? Where do you get that conclusion from without appealing to the New Testament itself?
Well, so I would say that I see a common literary pattern, as I explained at length and probably too long. And so this right now, I don't know. Again, I think the idea of the fulfillment of the prophecy is, that itself is a pretty, I guess, vague argument against, obtuse argument against compatibility. I mean, what you're saying is basically, okay, you have this interpretation, but it's not conclusive. It doesn't necessarily bind them, but it doesn't say that, the fact that there are and what, again, and I guess we're getting a little bit confused here, because we're talking about, for instance, the pattern of out of Egypt I called my son, and you said that's not even a prophecy. So how does that make it incompatible? I don't see that it makes it incompatible. There's a compatibility there. It's just that it doesn't what you're saying is that it's not the reasonable analysis, the allegorization of the patterns doesn't conclusively prove the claims of the New Testament. And if you want to say that, then okay, but that doesn't mean that they're incompatible. What that means is that it's making a bunch of claims. And I don't see any real incompatibility. I think, it's not an issue of incompatibility that we're dealing with here. It's an issue of lack of persuasiveness to you. And so, that being said, again, I thought that I didn't think that we were going to be going down this particular route because of the nature of the question. Is the New Testament compatible? Not is the New Testament mandated to be the only, the only interpretation or something along those lines. So I thought we would be talking more along the lines of the nature of messianism, the nature of the Son of God, things like that. I didn't really think that we would be talking about this prophecy issue, because I don't think it's an issue of compatibility. I think it's an issue of persuasiveness.
Okay.
The New Testament authors were using these rabbinic techniques, analytical techniques of allegorization and typology that led them to their conclusions. Does that mean that it's incompatible with the Tanakh? I don't think so.
Okay, so since we're talking about specifically the messianism, right? I'm assuming that you'd believe that Jesus is the Messiah, right? Just like as a broad claim.
Well, again, I don't talk about my own beliefs. I will say that I do understand that the New Testament is saying that Jesus is Messiah, and I'm prepared to argue from that position. Okay. I'm arguing from the as we talked about at the beginning. So yeah.
Okay. So if you want, I can list you some messianic criteria from the Tanakh, and then if you want, you can try to explain to me how this messianic criteria was fulfilled through Jesus, if that's the way you want to go. We can kind of talk from that point.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. So,
well, first of all, does before we do that, does the New Testament, does the Tanakh actually have a future Messiah other than David and Cyrus and all that? Does it actually talk about that?
Yes, it talks about a future Messiah, and it has specific criteria surrounding what the Messiah will do once the Messiah
Okay.
comes. So for one of them, one of the criteria is that the Messiah will be a Davidic ruler from the line of David. And as you know, ancient Israelite society, so the context of the Tanakh was paternal. So this would mean paternally through the line of David. Like, you know, from David down, down, down to Jesus being a son of David through the genealogy. And then there's also the prophecy about the Messiah reigning as king, specifically and explicitly over Israel, the land of Israel, the land on the mountains of Israel. And there's also a prophecy about Israel and Judah being restored and also united. I believe the specific terminology they bring is that Israel and Judah are two branches and that they are united as one. And there's also prophecy about scattered Israel being gathered and restored, so like the regathering of the exiles. There is also a prophecy.
There's a lot of these. Can we address them one by one?
Yeah. All
Because
right.
I'm already forgetting the first one. So the first one is the line of David.
Yeah.
Okay. So, does the Tanakh itself exclude the possibility of marriages and adoptions?
Logically, yes, because I don't see a specific thing that they say where it says that adoption acquires the genealogy of the father. Because the way that they phrase the line of David, it doesn't phrase it in a way of, oh, you are within like the household through adoption. It specifically says comes out from your body, speaking to David. So this has to be a blood relative, genealogical relative. And as I stated before, I believe in Numbers, it specifically says that the genealogies are reckoned by the house of the father.
Okay, can we get those verses pulled up, Melik?
Okay.
Yes, I'll pull up from Numbers. James, which
Okay.
verse were you thinking of?
Off the top of my head, I can't remember exactly which Numbers verse it is, but I do remember it is in Numbers where they reckon the genealogy explicitly by the father's houses rather than by the mother.
The count is done by the father's house. I'll
Yes.
post one of those
Okay.
verses. Okay.
While he's looking those up, I'll just say that the standard assumption is that the genealogy, or the standard interpretation is that the genealogy of Jesus through was that was generally a blood descent down to Joseph, Jesus's adopted father, and that the genealogy in Matthew or in Luke, excuse me, was a genealogy that included marriages and actually goes down to Mary, Jesus's biological mother. And so what we have here is somebody who there's complexity in his genealogy. However, it would be, I think, sufficient for the adopted son of Joseph, who comes from David, and the biological son of Mary, who comes from David, that Jesus would be accepted as a king in general, unless somebody specifically had an agenda to try to disqualify him. That is, that's my answer to that. And you'll always find people who are always picking on this genealogy thing, but his genealogy is fairly close to iron tight. And I think anybody who could come and be the Messiah would have to have some basically unprovable family tree in order to really do any better, I think. And so I know that there are always going to be people that nitpick on Jesus's genealogies, but they're pretty solid to where if somebody showed up as a king and they pulled those genealogies out there and said, my mother came from David, and my adopted father came from David, that he really would not be questioned as an heir. And so that's all I have to offer on that one. But I think it's and we can go through these verses specifically to see if what is mentioned in Numbers, if we could pull that up. I just think that let's pull up the specific wording on that.
The phrase "father's house," house of the father, is used often. Is one example that I'll bring up now from Numbers chapter 1, verse 4. So this is when Yahweh commands Moses to do a census of the Israelites, and then says for each tribe, each mateh in Hebrew, that there should be one helper, and that should be the head of his father's house.
But that's for the census. That's not for establishing royal validity. That's just saying that the head of his father's house is going to help with the census, right?
So you're looking for a specific verse that's saying what?
That's saying that a royal genealogy or a messianic genealogy has to be patrilineal. That's what he said, and he pointed to this verse. But this verse is just saying that that male heads of their father's houses are going to help Moses put this census together.
Sure, agreed. That being said, I think it's safe to say that if it does speak about a descendant of David taking the throne, then your claim is that it can be an adopted son, right? And
well, an adopted son and a biological mother.
I don't see that as a possibility. When it speaks about a descendant,
okay,
why would you assume that means?
We can move on, but remember now, I'm talking to James here. Okay.
Yeah, but I'm gonna, as I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, I will put in my 2 cents from time to time. Okay.
Okay.
But you go on with James, and I will bring up the first verse that he mentioned. Just give me a second or two to find it. But in the meantime, you guys can go on.
Okay. So do you want to go on to the second one then?
Yeah, I would say so. We can go on to the next one because I just don't think the audience, we're just going to get bogged down in this back and forth that people have had for, centuries.
2,000 years.
Right. So, we'll just let the audience make a call on that one. I think Jesus's genealogy is pretty good in terms of establishing royal validity. And his descent through the Davidic line. I know there's always going to be people nitpicking. We can probably move on. Okay.
So a second one that I've got is that the Messiah is to reign as king over Israel. I've got a few verses here. Isaiah 11, 1-5, Jeremiah 23, 5, and Ezekiel 37, 24-25.
Yes. So the thing is, and this is a problem. Basically, the New Testament claims that the overwhelming majority of these are yet to be fulfilled. Okay.
Okay.
So the New Testament, all of these things, yes, and this goes to the Rambam's Book of Kings and stuff. That the Messiah is going to build the temple. Jesus hadn't done that. Nobody has done that. And nobody can say that until after the temple is being built, has been built. Okay, so that's a disqualifier of anyone, not just Jesus, anyone. The New Testament claims that Jesus will do these things.
Okay.
Okay,
So
the
yeah,
New
it is a
Testament doesn't claim he has done these things.
yeah, but it is a disqualifier of anybody, but that's because there hasn't been the eschatological Messiah yet. That's the thing. The Jews are still awaiting this end times Messiah. So yeah, it is a disqualifier of anybody because nobody has done it yet.
And so, well, but the thing is, I don't think it's, well, the Rambam then, you know, if you follow this logic, because what you're using is the Rambam's logic of disqualifying Jesus as the Messiah. And the Rambam knows that nobody can be the Messiah until after the Messiah has done everything. Okay.
Yeah, because
He then says, but anybody who comes from David and isn't dead and teaches Torah can be somebody's preliminary, personal, what do they call it, presumptive candidate for somebody who could eventually be the Messiah. Because if all of these things have to be accomplished before you can say someone's the Messiah, then no one will be able to say anyone is the Messiah until after everything is over.
yeah,
Okay?
but the problem that I have with it is, right? You said that the New Testament talks about what you'd call like a second coming thing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And all of these things about the Messiah are basically, and this is what we're talking about. We're talking about compatibility with the New Testament, with the Tanakh. And the New Testament, I think, is compatible with the Tanakh in that it says Jesus has not done these things. He will.
Okay, but
Okay? And so there's the compatibility.
okay, but like for example, like Chabad also believes that the Rebbe will come back and do these things, and I believe Abu Isa had a messianic movement as well. He even claimed to be a prophet. But the problem here is that, so even if I were to accept everything from the New Testament, and also then I would believe at the very, very, very most that Jesus could be the Messiah. The New Testament claims that Jesus is the Messiah. So how could somebody that has not done the messianic prophecies yet be the Messiah? How can you be so sure that they are the Messiah without appealing to the New Testament's assertions about this?
Well, no, I mean, I would appeal to the New Testament's assertion about Jesus, but the whole logic that Jesus can't be the Messiah because he hasn't done anything that no one has done or can do until those things are done. You know, like,
Well, yeah,
I
but
mean,
yeah,
but so, but
that's
the new, you're moving on to the New Testament does claim that Jesus is the Messiah, and it doesn't necessarily claim that Jesus is the Messiah. It does not claim that Jesus is the Messiah because he has rebuilt the temple. Okay, it says it claims he is the Messiah. It asserts that he will, just like any valid candidate would. Okay, and it claims that he is the Messiah based on other things. It does not claim that he's the Messiah because he has built the temple. Okay, it says he will. Okay, but and then how he will also is a big topic of discussion. But the New Testament is not incompatible with the Tanakh because it does not say that he has built the temple. It does not say that he has ruled Israel, at least in a literal national sense. It says he will. And so I think there's no incompatibility here. Now you want to talk about his claim, or the New Testament's claim that he is the Messiah. That's completely different, but you can't really use any of these Rambam disqualifiers in order to talk about incompatibility. in order to talk about that, because it's compatible.
So just to interrupt for a second, I placed the verse that you were talking about, James. It's 2 Samuel chapter 7, verse 12. When your days are over and you rest with your ancestors, I will raise up your offspring to succeed you, your own flesh and blood, and I will establish his kingdom. And if you wish, we can also go to the Hebrew and see exactly what it's saying. Okay.
And there it doesn't say anything about patrilineal. So Mary, I think.
It doesn't say anything about patrilineal, but at the same time, you cannot take verses and just like look at them in a vacuum, because along the entire Tanakh, it never establishes maternal descent, and it only ever really establishes paternal descent. Paternal descent is the norm. It's the assumption. It's what the entire what you'd call like ancient Yahwistic society went off of. They went off of specifically paternal descent. And I personally wouldn't have a reason to accept maternal descent unless you'd be able to prove it directly from the Tanakh.
Okay, all this verse is saying, verse isn't saying anything about paternal, maternal. All it's saying is that your point was that it has to be actual flesh and blood descent, and that Jesus fulfills that in his descent from Mary. Okay, and he is actually flesh and blood descended from David through Mary, and that's all that verse says. And so, but again, I think for the audience here, we're at 56 minutes and we've only gone through a couple of these. I think we've kind of said all that we can say about the genealogy issue. And now we're
I think there's a lot more to say. I think there's a lot more to say, actually. So we look at 2 Samuel chapter 7, verse 12. In the Hebrew, there's a number of interesting things to point out. Okay, I'm just going to read it here. Okay, so it says ki yimalu. There's just a lot of noise in the background, so I might have to stop in a second. But ki yimalu yamecha. So when your days are fulfilled, v'shachavta et avotecha, and you sleep with your fathers, v'hakimoti et zarecha acharecha. I will. Sorry, just 1 second. There's some noise. Just give me 1 second, please. Apologize. It should dissipate in just a second. Yeah. So, I will raise up your seed that shall come out of your loins, and I will establish his kingdom. So there are a number of very important words here. Okay. So it says in the Hebrew, I will establish, or I will raise up your seed. That's what it literally says. It uses the word seed. Okay. Now, seed is often just translated as descendant or something along those lines. But the word seed is the same word that the Tanakh, that biblical Hebrew uses for sperm, and it specifically implies a male descendant. Just the sperm, the Y chromosome is passed down from father to son, with aside from mutations, is passed down as an exact replica from generation to generation, from father to son. That's done through the sperm. And so when the Tanakh uses this word zar'acha, it's specifically implying or specifically speaking about male physical descendants. In other words, the ones. In fact, we could even translate this word as "Wakimuti itzraha." So I will establish. I will raise up that which has the same Y chromosomal DNA as you do afterwards. And then it says, "Asher yitzei mi'me'echa," that comes out of your loins. This is speaking to David. Okay, comes out of your loins. Or I'm sorry, out of your loins.
Your logic there is saying that the Messiah has to be David's
physical descendant.
It says
physical male
what you're
descendant
saying is,
David.
Come out of David's loins. So in other words, it's got to be David's son, not David's grandson, because it has to come out of David's loins. You see how overblown you're getting with the specifics of it. Okay.
Well, I mean, I will grant you that in this
It's got to
case,
be
if we look
David's
at the
sperm.
context,
It's got to be David's sperm. Can't be David. It can't be Solomon's sperm. Got to be David's sperm.
I will grant you that in this case, this is speaking specifically about Solomon. Okay, but so it is it is Samuel. 2 Samuel 7 is speaking about Solomon, because then it goes on in the next verse to say that who you've named he's going to build a house in my name. Okay, so you're right. This verse is not technically a proof verse that the Messiah down the road is going to be out of his loins, but I think it does imply the general idea that what's important here is patrilineal descent and actual actual bloodline descent from one generation to the other. I could look for some other verses that might prove.
I see that out of David's seed, okay, a descendant will come down through Mary biologically to Jesus.
Where do you see that? Again, I don't want to kidnap the debate there, but where do you see that? Where in the Old Testament?
Again, it says out of David's sperm. Okay.
This is specifically 2 Samuel chapter 7 verse 12 is speaking about Solomon. Okay.
Yeah.
It's not speaking about Messiah, first of all. Okay. The 2 Samuel 7 is speaking it's mostly historical here. This is not poetic or prophetical. This is prophecy, but it's not long distance end of days prophecy. This is specifically speaking. This is again, I have to get context here. But this is specifically speaking about Solomon following in David's footsteps. Okay.
Right.
Okay.
So there you go.
Where do you see in the Tanakh? Where do you see in the Tanakh?
I don't see this verse requiring patrilineal biological relation.
Oh, it definitely does. There's without a doubt. I give you two examples here. What's that?
Okay.
Not for the Messiah, for the son, for Solomon. So I'm agreeing with you that this is not a proof verse for way down the generations for the Messiah, but it does imply at least that at least in the following generation, it was important that the one who followed in David's footsteps would be his biological son.
Well, he is his biological son through Mary.
Whose biological son?
Jesus is David's biological descendant.
I'm sorry. I'll
Jesus
restate
is
that.
David's biological descendant.
I'll restate that. The language here in the Hebrew clearly proves, without almost any shadow of a doubt, that this is speaking about a biological son of David, not of David's mother. Not of Solomon's mother, but of David. Okay. Again, if you want, we can go through the Hebrew. We can look at some language, including this word zarafah, and including this word where it says "Asher yitzeh mima'echa," who shall come out of your loins, speaking to David. Right. That's a euphemism. When it says "come out of your loins," that's a euphemism again for seed or sperm. Right. What comes out of it, loins is a euphemism for the private part. What comes out of the private part is the sperm, and so it's basically saying someone who's going to be your biological son. It's clear. It's 100% clear. So your refutation.
Nothing has changed.
Wait, let me just finish the point. Your refutation in this case can be not. If you want to give a refutation that this is not speaking about a biological son of David, you don't have a chance. You're out to lunch. If your refutation is going to be, well, this is speaking about only the following generation, Solomon, and doesn't say anything about the future Messiah, if you want to call it that, then you will have a point. But then there are other verses I think that imply that the eventual Messiah or the eventual king over Israel will come from the house of David and will be an actual biological descendant of David. But this verse doesn't help your case.
Jesus comes from the house of David and is actually a biological son of David through Mary.
It doesn't.
Okay.
And he has the
descent does not go through the mother.
Adoptive patrilineal validity through Joseph.
I want to turn it back over to James.
That's where we are, and that's where we've always been. And the audience.
No, it's not where we are.
It's not where we are. And we're moving on. We're at an hour.
Well, 1 second. No, we're not moving on quite yet. The Torah throughout the entire Tanakh. Okay, in fact, in this week's Torah study, we even spoke about this. There's not a single verse, despite some rabbinical attempts to show, there's not a single verse that shows that lineage, identity, whether you're an Israelite and what tribe you come from, what clan you come from, what father's house you come from. That's the expression that's used often, Beit Avot, okay, or Beit Av, okay. There's not a single indication anywhere in the Tanakh that that one determines lineage through the mother. It's always through the father.
But
Okay?
he
Yeah.
has lineage through his father, and he has biological descent through his
He doesn't
mother.
have biological
Okay.
lineage. Jesus does not have biological lineage
that's
through his
all
father,
there
right?
is. And the audience knows this, okay? So we can move on.
Jesus, no, we can't, because the audience does not know this. Jesus does not have biological descent from David through his father, right? Because
He's biologically
he's not his
descended
father.
through mother, and he has patrilineal validity through his adoptive father.
Yeah,
That's
right.
that's
We're going in
what
circles
Jesus
here.
has.
Yeah, but that doesn't count in the Tanakh. Anyway, I don't want to steal James's thunder, so I'm going to turn it back up
Yeah,
over to
okay,
James.
thanks.
James, go ahead.
Okay, so what I was trying to say before is that yeah, like sure, if you want to go like hyper literalist absolute on this, then yeah, there's technically no thing that like bans maternal descent, but at the same time, you have no reason to believe that maternal descent would be considered normal in any way, because there's a lot of verses within Tanakh. Like I said, you can't read these verses in an absolute vacuum, because otherwise you're not going to be able to understand the full worldview and context of what's going on. For example, if you're able to pull up Numbers 118, that is explicitly a genealogy identified by the father's house. And
Sure.
yeah, sure, you can establish that Joseph adopted Jesus or something like that, but adoption doesn't automatically adoption doesn't change your genealogy. And it says in 2 Samuel, from the body of David, explicitly.
I'm going to post the verses so there's no misconception whatsoever. I'm going to post the verses in Hebrew, and then I'll translate them as necessary. So you wanted Numbers 118, right, James?
Yes.
So I'm going to be posting all the verses in Hebrew because we're talking about the English translations obviously can play with the Hebrew words. So I don't want there to be any misconception. So I'll translate if necessary. You just let me know. Okay. Oh, what is going on here? There we go. Okay. Just translate this. This is Numbers 1:18. And it says, so gather together the entire congregation on the first day of the second month, and let them present their genealogies according to their families, levet avotam, and according to their fathers' houses, b'mispar shemot miben esrim, according b'mispar shemot, and according to the number of names, miben esrim shana umala lehul golotam, from 20 years of age and higher, according to their head counts. Okay, and the key here is I'll just pick out the key words here. Okay, Yaldu al mishpachotam levet avotam. Yaldu, the underlying root there is yeled, is yalad, yud, lamed, daled. And so it literally means let them, it's very hard to translate into English, but it really means present their genealogies. So Yaldu, let them present their genealogies al mishpachotam, according to their clans. Mishpachotam can be translated in various different ways. It's usually translated here as clans or families, but then afterwards it says specifically levet avotam, according to their fathers' houses. Levet avotam. Okay, and I'll focus on these words here in the Hebrew. Let me just post it, just those words, because those are the key words. And again, this is Numbers. This is Numbers chapter 7, verse 18. Okay, I'm gonna grab that and put it up. Okay, Yaldu al mishpachotam levet avotam. Okay. Present your genealogies according to your father's houses. You know the word bait, right? Bayit. Yonatan, you're familiar with biblical Hebrew. We've spoken about that before. So bayit means house. Avot, av means father. Avot means fathers, and avotam means their fathers. Okay. So lebeit avotam, according to their fathers' houses, or the house of their fathers. Okay.
I'm not going to say what I said before again.
Okay.
That Jesus has. I'm not going to say it again. Can we move on? Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay. So we dealt with the genealogy question. I think the audience is familiar with all of that. And we've dealt with the Rambam's qualifications for the Messiah. and we've dealt with that. Now I want to know exactly if James could go over the last point that he was making before we got back onto the genealogy issue.
Okay. So the second criteria that I've got here is that the Messiah is to reign as king over Israel. And the verses that I've got about this are Isaiah 11:1-5, Jeremiah 23:5, and Ezekiel 37:24-25.
Well, I don't think
James,
we'll
can
need to. I don't think we'll need to go for the verses on that. It's the same thing that we were talking about before. That no one has done this, and no
Yeah,
one will
but
do this until it's done.
yeah, but
Okay, and
if
the New Testament doesn't claim that Jesus has done.
the New Testament claims that Jesus is the Messiah, though, and there's specific messianic criteria within the Tanakh that needs to be fulfilled before somebody can be declared the Messiah. Yeah, nobody has done this, but nobody has been declared this Messiah yet because nobody has done this.
But
My argument isn't that the Jews actually named somebody else the Messiah. For example, a lot of people during his time thought Bar Kokhba was going to be the Messiah. Once he died, nobody now believes he's the Messiah because he died. He failed in his mission, sadly. So since he died, he failed in his mission. Even if there was a book similar to the New Testament speaking about Bar Kokhba, this still would not mean that Bar Kokhba is the Messiah or is going to be the Messiah. It just plainly no. Just because Jesus has a book asserting things surrounding him being the Messiah does not automatically mean he'd make his claim to being the Messiah true. So, like I said, even if I accepted every single claim made by the New Testament, if I ran them against the Tanakh, then at the very, very most, the conclusion that I would get to is that Jesus might be the Messiah in the future. But this absolutely does not let me name him the Messiah.
well, you say that Jesus meets those criteria for determining who the Messiah. Jesus will meet the New Testament claims that Jesus will meet those requirements in the future.
Okay.
For determining who the Messiah is. It says that he is the Messiah when Peter says that he's the Messiah, and he basically says Peter is correct.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, what reason do I have to believe that, quote unquote, he might be the Messiah in the future when I can go outside and I don't see the job of the Messiah being done? Like, what reason would I have to adopt the New Testament when its central claim, well, other than like the resurrection, obviously, but when one of its central claims, like the actual foundation of Christian theology in itself, is that Jesus is the Messiah? Why
Right.
should I accept that when I can go outside and I can't see that happening?
Well, so I would say when John the Baptist asked Jesus if he was the one that they were waiting for, and he said, the blind receive their sight and the lame walk and all that, you know, what do you think?
Well,
That was Jesus's answer. And so this brings to a theological point. What is the Messiah? Like, what does it mean to be the Holy One of Israel, God's anointed?
well, in its baseline sense, like there's multiple messiahs within the Tanakh, and they're not all the end times Messiah. For example, Cyrus is the Messiah. So at its baseline meaning, being a Messiah means to just be somebody that has been anointed by God to do something. But the term that we're talking about, this Messiah, is the end times Messiah that has specific criteria that are supposed to be fulfilled before he can be known as the Messiah. If the Messiah fails to do these things and dies, then he could not have been the Messiah, because the Messiah is destined to do these things. Once after he does these things, sure, go for it. You can call him the Messiah. Everybody will know that he is the Messiah, because there's going to be universal knowledge of this according to the Tanakh. So we would not be arguing about this if Jesus was the Messiah. And since you say that Jesus might do this in the future, I don't really have a reason to accept this if it's just going off of a maybe.
Well, so again, I think we're getting a little bit circular here. You remember, nobody can be presumed to be the Messiah until the end times is complete, according to these criteria. So you don't judge, and the New Testament doesn't solely judge whether Jesus is the Messiah or declare Jesus to be the Messiah simply because he meets these criteria. It says he will meet these criteria, but that's not what makes him the Messiah, or not only what makes him the Messiah.
I'm going to throw in another 2 cents here. What evidence do you have in the Tanakh? Oh, I'm sorry to upset you by asking a question.
You're quite a moderator.
I, for the most part, been moderating. But what evidence do you have? Do you have any verse anywhere in the Tanakh that gives any indication that the Messiah is going to die and then come back to life?
Well, that right there is going to require illustrating patterns, and those patterns will not be within the directly mentioned historical concept. And so, or context, and so, you know,
so the
we're back to that original thing.
No. So the answer is that after Jesus died, they had to make up a story. He did not fill, as James has been saying all along, he did not fulfill any of the requirements of the Messiah, and so therefore a story had to be made up that he's going to die, that he's going to come back to life at the end of days.
He did meet a number of requirements for the Messiah, just not these that you're talking about.
Okay.
What you're saying is there are certain requirements for the Messiah that aren't going to be met until the Messiah is done doing what the Messiah does, and Jesus hasn't done those yet. So
okay,
he can't be the Messiah. It's a ridiculous assertion. So I'm trying to say that because James, the guy I'm really talking to here, Malik, James had a valid question that I'm trying to address, but you have to take it out of this context of the Rambam's, set of requirements. Okay. And so we have to talk about what is the Messiah. And James brought up a point. There's a lot of Messiahs out there, but we're talking about this end times Messiah. Okay. Actually, and so who is this end times Messiah? What is this end times Messiah going to be? All right. Now, and I guess rather than be Socratic here, I'll just be a little bit proactive and say that the concept of the anointed one of God, the Holy One of God, God's ultimate king is what the Messiah is. Is that correct? What this end times Messiah is? Is that correct?
Yeah, but it's specifically bound to being king over the land on the mountains of Israel.
Well, is that only it? Because I believe the Messiah is going to rule the entire world, right?
I can't remember that exact claim, but one of the specific things that the Messiah needs to do is first rule over Israel specifically. And since Jesus never ruled over Israel, then I'm kind of reluctant to accept him as this guy is the Messiah, or this guy is going to be the Messiah. Because in the Tanakh, we don't have any examples of somebody dying and then resurrecting and then doing something, or like becoming the Messiah or anything like that. So I feel like you're kind of trying to prove a negative here.
Well, all I'm trying to say is that there's no incompatibility here, because the Tanakh says the Messiah will do these things, and the New Testament also says the Messiah will do these things. Okay? So there's compatibility here.
Okay.
Now, to get more specific, then, to address your specific claim of why should I think Jesus is the Messiah, because he doesn't meet that claim. Well, again, nobody does. Okay. There's compatibility. The Tanakh says the Messiah will do this. The New Testament says the Messiah will do this. But to answer your question of, why should I think Jesus is the Messiah, you have to actually talk about what the Messiah is. And what the Messiah is not only a ruler over the land of Israel. Is that correct? I mean, the Messiah is God's representative on earth. Is that correct?
Yeah, but we're talking about a specific type of Messiah that's usually affiliated with Jesus. Because, like, yeah, like nobody has been the Messiah, but I'm trying to ask you to try to prove to me why I should believe that Jesus specifically is the Messiah. Because also, like, this isn't like, yeah, sure, if you want to go really, really, really technical, then yeah, sure, awaiting a Messiah doesn't specifically discount the New Testament, but I have other issues that actually do directly go against the New Testament. So, or the Old
Okay,
Testament.
well, I
Sorry.
don't know exactly. Those other issues might be another leg of the conversation, but I think, just answering your question, why you should think Jesus is the Messiah would then come to, well, what is the Messiah? The Messiah is the ultimate representative of God. Okay. He's the ultimate king of God. That's where the whole monogenes Son of God is. The Son of God who is more of a Son of God than all the sons of God, right? So the angels are sons of God, okay? The tzedekим are sons of God, okay? But this ultimate Messiah, this ultimate singular anointed, who's more anointed than all the other anointed, would then be not only the king over the land, which the Messiah, which the New Testament claims Jesus will be, but that he is an ultimate Son of God. He's an ultimate representative of God. And so, and the New Testament claims that that's what Jesus is.
Okay, but like I said, I'm just gonna bring it back to what I said before. So, like, yeah, sure, the Messiah is supposed to be like the ultimate, like, end times anointed, like you said, but I'm asking the claim of why should I accept specifically Jesus as who for sure will be the Messiah when, like I said, there's specific criteria that he has not filled out. Like, I know I've said this before, but I don't feel like you're like answering it. Like, why should I accept specifically Jesus as the Messiah when there have been plenty of other people who have tried and failed to commit to the messianic criteria who have also failed? Or why shouldn't I accept the Rebbe as the Messiah? There's a lot of Chabadniks that believe that the Rebbe will be the Messiah. There's a lot of Chabadniks that believe he will resurrect and become the Messiah. Why should I accept specifically Jesus outside of just an extremely broad, oh, he will be the ultimate representative? Because, like, if a government doesn't have a constitution, then or like if a government doesn't have any laws at all, can you call it a fully formed and fully functioning government? I don't think so in the general sense. So this goes the same as the Messiah. The Messiah has specific criteria, and you can't just go off of extremely sweeping and broad claims in order to claim somebody as such without first addressing the specifics of it.
Well, if you say that the New Testament, according to the New Testament, Jesus is spotted alive. He's gone up to heaven and he's coming back. Okay. So then he is capable of ruling the land of Israel from Jerusalem. And so it says he will do that, and he's capable of doing that. And so therefore he can meet that requirement. There's no one who has any better claim than he does. The Rebbe, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
no,
but
you can't. So in terms of that specific claim of ruling Israel, okay, ruling the land of Israel, he's got as much of a. You can point to Jesus just as much as you can point to anybody else. There's nobody who could possibly do a better job of meeting that claim than Jesus. Now, then, though, when you go to your general question of why you should accept that Jesus is the Messiah, is because the Messiah is this Davidic, Messiah ben David is the ultimate representative of God. And so that would then require somebody who is far more powerful and good and just than any human king that we could conceive of. It would require, this is God's ultimate representative is not going to be just King Charles. You know what I mean?
Yeah. But
God's ultimate Messiah, who's beyond any of the other ones, is going to have to be a very, very, very intense representative of God. And so then we talk about, well, does Jesus meet that criteria? Well, according to the New Testament, he was the first being to ever exist. He created the angels. He created the world. Okay. And he appeared he appeared all throughout the Tanakh, and he as a super being. And then he appeared in Galilee, and he raised the dead and performed miracles. He taught ethics consistently with the Torah. His ethics are identical to the Torah's ethics. Being basically the ultimate, most powerful, most good being that could possibly be conceived of, puts him in the place of being God's ultimate representative, and therefore being a Messiah of a caliber higher than Cyrus, David, Saul, or anybody else that's mentioned. Right?
Okay, but the big problem that I see here is, so as you know, Karaites as well as Rabbinites both do not canonize the New Testament because this isn't even just about the Messiah thing. This is about other specific issues. For example, like the New Testament quite literally and explicitly several times saying that you do not need to follow the law to be saved, and that you only need to follow Christ. So Melech, can you please pull up Romans 6:14?
Romans 6:14. Coming right up.
Yes.
You can go ahead. It'll be up. It'll take a minute or so.
Okay, so
I think I know where you're going with this. So I would say then, does the Tanakh say that an Eskimo born in the North Pole at 1000 BCE need to follow all of the Torah commandments revealed at Sinai in order to be saved?
well, does it say that you don't need to follow the law to be saved? That's quite a specific claim that it could have made at any point. Does it ever say that you do not need to follow the law to be saved in the Tanakh? Or does it consistently and repeatedly tie Israel's covenant to the Torah, to the 5 books of Moses, to Yahweh's instruction? Does it say not to add or remove from it? Does it say to keep every word in the Torah, every commandment in the Torah, without adding or removing from it? Because if it does say this in Deuteronomy 14, Deuteronomy 13, I think 13:1, it says that many times. So now you're going to have to justify why I should take this leap from a positive, keep this law, to a negative, don't keep this law. You're going to have to justify why I should do that from the Tanakh without appealing to the New Testament, because that's not part of my canon.
Noah did not follow the Mosaic commandments. Because you brought in this term, saved. All right. Yeshua. Okay. So to be saved. You brought this into the thing, and I think it might have something to do with your understanding of the New Testament being antinomian. And Noah did not follow these. Was Noah saved?
Was the law in effect by the time of Noah? Was the law fully in effect within the narrative? Did Yahweh actually was this, if this was before Sinai, then this is kind of a non sequitur here. It's like saying, was the US government in the second the Constitution was made? Like, yeah, was it in the same form as the US government now? No, but that doesn't mean it's not the US government then. But that also means that there's probably a ton of things under the Articles of Confederation that you'd be able to do that you can't do anymore. Does that mean that that was some kind of like completely different scenario? No, it's just that there have been further amendments, there have been further legal rulings, further laws. That doesn't mean that they're two different things. And that doesn't mean that you can take the Articles of Confederation and use it to override the modern Constitution.
Well, again, you're talking about this concept of salvation. I'm really not sure that the Tanakh says that you need to follow the law to be saved. Okay. Did Job, I mean, was he didn't follow the law? Was he saved?
Job was not an Israelite. Once the law is given,
right. You don't have to be an Israelite to be saved, so you don't have to follow the law to be saved.
No, but an Israelite is required to follow the law. I'm sorry, I'm going to butt out again.
Yeah, an Israelite is required to follow the law, but is an Israelite required to follow the law in order to be saved?
Yes, in a nutshell.
And so, okay, you have what I think Christians call a two covenant theology. Okay.
What?
So let me think about this. So you're saying that God would not require Job to follow the law to be saved, but he would require David to follow the law to be saved.
Damn right. The Torah is a covenant between Israel, between God, between Yahweh and Israel. So of course that's the answer. The other nations are supposed to learn from this law and they're supposed to emulate it, but but it itself is a covenant between God, between Yahweh and Israel, of course.
So
Yeah.
Also the thing
Do you concur, since I'm actually talking with you, James, with what Melik said?
Well, yeah, for the most part, I just want to kind of define what he precisely means by saved, because the Tanakh doesn't have, if that's what you're thinking about, the specific theology of, oh, if you do these laws, then in the afterlife you're going to heaven or you're going to hell. So heaven and hell in the Christian sense aren't a thing within Judaism. Everybody goes. Yep.
And just to clarify, sorry, that's why I said in a nutshell. Yes, because it's too simplistic. It's too black and white an answer. But to put it in those terms, that's why I said yes.
Before you continue, James, though, you I think concurred with me when you said that that the Tanakh does not really have a requirement to follow the law to be saved. Is that correct?
Not for people that are outside, no. But the thing is, I'm trying to differentiate between what would usually be like the typical, like what you'd say Christian definition of saved versus what the Tanakh definition of saved is. So I'm trying to differentiate. So I'm going to define it what I believe it is defined in a kind of broad sense biblically. I'm not really going to go into like exact specifics here. So the religion of the Torah is about what you do while you're alive. So that's kind of what the emphasis is on, what you do while you are alive. So you're better off, if you're an Israelite, you ought to follow the law while you are alive, because it is your, what you'd say, birthright. It is your duty to keep the law, because you are a chosen people to God, selected to keep the law. And you're not saved in the sense of you get sent somewhere really specific in the afterlife. What I'm trying to say is everybody goes to the same place. I think this is in Ecclesiastes 9:10. where it says, whatever your hand finds to do, do it, for in Sheol, where you are going, no one works or thinks about anything. So everybody goes to the same place. And this is also another difference that I'd say within theology, because Judaism is about what you do while you are alive, and Christianity does more of an emphasis on what you do so that you can have a specific type of afterlife. So I think this is also another very sharp theological difference, if you understand what I mean.
So what is salvation in Judaism then?
Well, salvation in
According
Judaism.
to the Tanakh.
So salvation in Judaism would just be like what happens to you during your life, if you're righteous or not, if you keep the law or not. It's not like the later concept of what you'd call like an afterlife or something like that. Like if you're an Israelite and you do not keep the law, then there's no like sharp bar between like, oh, you're like definitely saved and you're going to this place or you're not. But at the same time, you're still sinning against God, because you as a people, you as a nation, you as an ethnic group were chosen to keep this law. So what I would say is you're saved, at least in my personal definition, would be on good terms with God. You know what I mean?
Okay. Yeah, I think mostly that is like atonement, being atoned for. I'd have to go through myself and look at, is there a difference between what the New Testament calls salvation and what the Tanakh calls salvation? I'll say that that I haven't really seen a difference in all of my studies of both. I would say that both have a broad definition, because in the New Testament there is also a very strong current of, the more obedient you are to God, the better things will go. That is mirrored. When you disobey God, things go badly. Things like that. That I see a consistency between the Tanakh and the New Testament.
Okay.
In terms of the concept of salvation, I see them both being broad, and I see the Tanakh being less specific, because the New Testament does talk about salvation from the effects of sin. If you do better things, you're not going to get into trouble that you would get into from doing bad things, and so on. That also is in the New Testament. But yes, the New Testament does have a specific concept of being saved from actual death and saved from actual hell, and that is not specifically pointed to, as far as I know, by the word salvation. There is the concept, when David says, I know you will not leave my soul in hell, and things like that, or in Sheol, things like that. And so there is an idea, there are ideas in the Tanakh of a kind of a salvation that do extend beyond this life. But I would say that the Tanakh is more vague, because again, it deals in these common patterns. It just talks about being saved, and then the New Testament comes along and specifically says being saved from death or being saved from hell. And so you get more specifics, but I don't see that there's an incompatibility there. The New Testament does talk about being saved from the consequences of sin, such as, if you go around having promiscuous sex, you're going to get the clap, that sort of stuff. And that's what you're saying that the Tanakh concentrates on. And I would agree with you, but there's consistency there. The New Testament concentrates on that somewhat. The Tanakh concentrates on it a lot. The New Testament concentrates a lot on being saved from death and hell. And I believe you have some references to it in the Tanakh. Really to get more detail into that, we'd probably have to start stacking up some verses, as you talk about. We'd probably have to start looking at, well, okay, I know you will not leave my soul in hell, or in Sheol, is what David says. That to me conceptually is a form of salvation as described in the New Testament of being saved from death.
Okay.
So I see consistency there. I don't see outright incompatibility. I just see, again, the Tanakh talks about these general patterns that the New Testament gives a number of specifics on.
Guys, 15-minute warning. We're going to end it in about 15 minutes because it is getting late here.
Okay. So,
All
so would you broadly agree that salvation within the New Testament is centered around kind of, I don't know, like broadly centered around the afterlife, for example, like where you go after death? Would you agree on that?
I will say that one of Jesus's strongest arguments is, who in the house wants to live? Okay. I mean, that's a big thing. And when you talk about salvation, there's all kinds of salvation that you can be saved from. But again, if we're talking about the ultimate Messiah, the ultimate representative from God, he's not going to just be saving you from a bad hair day. He's going to be saving you from the ultimate thing that you absolutely want to get saved from. And that's death and any horrific thing that could happen after death. And so, yeah, he's gonna concentrate on that. But he also talks about being saved from. He also talks about being saved from a bad hair day. He also talks about being saved from the consequences of doing bad things and getting in trouble for them. He talks about those things, and there's consistency. But as an ultimate Messiah, an ultimate representative of God, he's going to talk about a lot about the ultimate thing to get saved from. So
Okay.
yeah, there's a bit of a difference, but I do not think it's incompatible with the Tanakh. It's not inconsistent with the Tanakh. I think it's a different emphasis, but I think that emphasis is consistent with the concept of an ultimate Messiah.
Okay. So, I'm gonna ask like a narrower question, kind of.
Okay.
Would you agree that within the New Testament there's a difference between, like, I guess, like where you go when you die depending on what you do? You know what I mean by that? Like, would you say that there's a difference?
Well, this is getting into deep New Testament territory without really. I will say that the New Testament talks about where you go when you die being a result of where Jesus puts you.
Okay, so you would say that there is generally kind of like a difference depending on like what you do or something like that. Like, for example, like where you get sent afterwards.
Well, it basically says that Jesus will put you where you go depending on whether you're his disciple and whether you love him.
Okay.
And that if that happens, if you are his disciple and you love him, then he'll bring you to heaven where he is, but that's going to be an act of grace. Okay. That he is going to do that to a variety of people. Some were really great people and some were not that great of people. But he'll know who loves him, and everybody's going to require grace. Yes, what you do factors in there because it's what he's going to read to determine whether you love him or not. But it's not going to be it's going to be a matter of grace. Nobody's going to like earn it. Nobody's going to be good enough or do the right things in order to get there. People will do the right thing some of the time. People will regret not doing the right thing some of the time. People will, beg to go there knowing that they haven't done the right things enough of the time, all of that sort of stuff. So doing, what you do fits into the equation, but it's not the bedrock of the equation.
Okay.
Yeah. So I would say there is that, but it's a
Okay.
matter of grace. And that, that's where Protestants disagree about a lot of things from Catholics and Orthodox Christians fight over this, because there's just a fundamental tension within all of that. You go to heaven because Jesus brings you there, and he brings his people there who love him. Okay. And so but nobody deserves to go there and all that sort of stuff. And so then you have on the other end, okay, the conclusion that a lot of people draw is, okay, so all I got to do is say, Jesus, take me, and he'll take you. Well, it's a little more than that. But that's something that Christians and all kinds of people have been sort of arguing and trying to wrap their heads around the issue of this concept of salvation by grace, but it can't just be a fake BS that you can't just say Jesus send me and then go rape kids, and there's got to be something real to it. It's a matter of grace, not what you do. But if you don't do something, then it's not real, and that is, I think, it's a little bit maybe beyond the scope of this compatibility that we're talking about from New Testament to Old Testament. That's really something that Christians really, have to, people spend their lives sort of figuring this out. Okay. And, it might be a little bit beyond the scope of this conversation. But if where you're going with it is that the Tanakh actually thinks that what you do is important, where the New Testament doesn't, I really don't see too much of an inconsistency there, because the New Testament does talk about doing stuff and being real about it. And
Yeah.
I guess we're rambling.
Okay, so I was actually pointing at the opposite, because the Old Testament or the Tanakh says everybody goes to the exact same place after death, no matter what happens to them.
Okay.
Mele, can you pull up Ecclesiastes? I believe it's 9:10.
Yes, I'll bring it right up. You can go on. It'll be up within about a minute.
Okay, because I think what you were generally getting at is that where you go depends on grace, right? So where you go depends on the grace of God. So
you want to concentrate more on the heaven versus hell in the New Testament versus just Sheol.
Because there's no such concept as hell in the Tanakh, and heaven is not somewhere people can normally go to as well in the Tanakh. It is the realm of the Elohim, the realm of God. God's counsel is there, the angels are there, etc. So that's not somewhere that humans can normally go to. And the verse that I cited is explicit about where we go, where everybody goes. There's no difference between who you are, what you do, grace, etc. Everybody goes to the same place, because as I said before, Judaism as a religion, or the religion of the Torah, however you want to call it, is about what you do while you're alive rather than what happens to you after you die.
Well, but I don't know that it says that everybody goes to the same place. For one, the Tanakh says a whole lot less about this, but for instance, in Isaiah, I believe it talks about the kings of the earth, the Rephaim, basically being shades in misery in one place. And then it talks about, but the patriarchs went to the lands of their fathers. The heroes went to where their fathers went, which is presumably not a place of misery and darkness like the kings of the earth. So there are allusions to different fates after death. And then there's also the concept of the resurrection, which is a resurrection on earth, presumably. But
James, I think maybe you're speaking about
that in Daniel
Ecclesiastes.
is a little vague, because it talks about some people will be resurrected to basically some sort of exaltation, leolam, until the end of the world, and others will be, resurrected to a resurrection of shame, leolam, until the end of the world. And so it's not exactly clear what this idea of a resurrection is. And, is it a resurrection into another world, or is it a resurrection on earth? There are shades and flavors of both. And these same shades and flavors are talked about in the New Testament, when it talks about, some people coming back and ruling the earth with, being resurrected and ruling the earth with the Messiah and the Messianic kingdom, and so on and so forth. So the New Testament also has a resurrection on earth that it talks about, as well as sort of a rebirth into another realm, as it talks about. So I see similarities here, but again, the Tanakh is a lot more, it's more vague, and it illustrates patterns that the New Testament offers specifics on that are consistent with those patterns.
Okay. So I just want to ask as well, how do you know that the books that you follow are correct? If you're just going off of that, this seems to follow up with what I see before, if I apply my own interpretive rules to it. What about something like, have you ever heard of the War Scrolls, or the War Scroll? Sorry, it's singular. So the War Scroll ties into Daniel pretty well. It's this final end times eschatological battle of the sons of light versus the sons of Belial, or the sons of darkness. Since
And that's also in Community Rule. You're talking DSS.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The War Scroll talks a lot about the final battle, like I said, the end times battle of the sons of light versus the sons of darkness. So since you seem to be going off of things that could make sense or could follow naturally from the Tanakh, do you have that like within your canon? Like, do you believe it to be true?
Yeah. I mean, but so the way I look at a lot of this extra biblical stuff, and I see it in the Talmud and in the Midrashim. I see a lot of this stuff in Christian literature, is that I see truth represented to degree, or in a general concept, and but not in every way. Like you can find divine truth in War and Peace, when it says things that are in line with the Tanakh and so on. But the entire book of War and Peace is not. And so I look at a lot of the apocryphal literature, New Testament-ish apocryphal literature, like the Epistle of Barnabas or so on, as well as the Jewish the more, I guess you could say, Tanakh apocryphal literature, like Tobit, and the books of Maccabees and that sort of stuff. I see that as containing elements of divine truth, but that there will be ways that are inconsistent with it. And I do see the Dead Sea Scrolls as actually being a kind of a bridge, because there's a lot of stuff that the rabbis will say that the New Testament is not Judaism because, they have developed medieval doctrines. And you go back and that you find that the Dead Sea Scrolls have a lot more in common with the New Testament, than modern rabbinic Judaism does in a lot of cases. And so, I do see the Dead Sea Scrolls as, in a lot of cases, not scripturally level, but in a lot of cases, there's a lot of commonality. And I do see that the New Testament does talk about a battle between the forces of evil and the forces of good. The Battle of Armageddon. The New Testament also talks about the Battle of Gog and Magog, like the Tanakh does. And so, the battle between the sons of light and the sons of darkness is generally a biblical or a Torah concept. But I'm not going to stand behind, the specific wordings of all of those documents. But I see the Dead Sea Scrolls as being within the stream.
Okay.
Jonathan, we're gonna close the discussion now, and we'll just go to some final statements. So, Jonathan, I'm gonna let you go first, so you can make a final statement, please.
I'm gonna make this one really short because I think my time online has exceeded James's. My mouth has been open about 10 times as much as James's has on this thing. So I'm gonna make this really short and say just. I see consistency. There's always more to talk about. And I appreciate the opportunity to come on here and talk with James. And that's really, I guess I'm going to leave it at that for now. Maybe we can do it again. Maybe we can do it offline or something along those lines, on some other topic.
Very good. James?
So overall, I think the discussion we had is really interesting. Obviously, I still would highly disagree on some of your points, but at the same time, we're both, as they say, Judaism is a religion of arguing. So it's not like it's a bad thing to do this, because sometimes you're able to just ask questions about things and learn more things in general through talking with people in this way. But I'd still say I definitely disagree. But I appreciate the opportunity to be able to talk to you about this, because some of the specific points you made aren't exactly points that I've seen expressed before, and I think it's interesting to hear them.
Thanks.
Very good. Very good. All right. I'm glad you guys had a productive conversation. I'm glad I was able to stay out of it mostly. That's a new accomplishment for me. And I will say that, of course, I appreciate you coming on, Yonatan. I strongly disagree. Maybe you and I will debate at a certain time, and we can get into it. But obviously, I think that the New Testament is just an attempt to justify a remedy that was popular among a certain sect at a certain time, and to read into or to retrofit certain stories of Jesus's life back into prophecies of the Old Testament. Of course, the New Testament had the great advantage of being written after the I don't even like to call it the Old Testament, after the Tanakh, after the Hebrew Bible. So it already knew what it had to say and what it did not have to say. At any rate, I'll leave it at that. But guys, thank you for joining us here this evening, or where you are, James, this morning or afternoon, I guess
1
it
p.m.
is.
here.
Yeah, 1 p.m. there. And I hope the audience enjoyed it. And maybe we'll have a continuation in one form or another at some point.
Yeah, maybe.
All right, thanks.
Guys. All right,
Thanks.
It's getting late here, so I'm going to say goodnight to everybody, and we'll see you all again soon.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Bye-bye.
עזרי מעם השם, עושה שמיים וארץ, אל ייתן למות רגליך, אל ינום שומרך. הנה לא ינום ולא ישן שומר ישראל, השם שומרך, השם צילך, על יד ימינך. יומם השמש לא יככה וירח בלילה, השם ישמורך מכל רע, ישמור את נפשך, השם ישמור צאתך ובואך מעתה ועד עולם. שיר למעלות, אשא עיני אל ההרים, מאין יבוא עזרי, עזרי מעם השם, עושה שמיים וארץ, אל ייתן למות רגליך, אל ינום שומרך. הנה לא ינום ולא ישן שומר ישראל, השם שומרך, השם צילך, על יד ימינך. יומם השמש לא יככה וירח בלילה, השם ישמורך מכל רע, ישמור את נפשך, השם ישמור צאתך ובואך מעתה ועד עולם. שומר ישראל, השם שומרך, השם צילך, על יד ימינך. יומם השמש לא יככה וירח בלילה, השם ישמורך מכל רע, ישמור את נפשך, השם ישמור צאתך ובואך מעתה ועד עולם. אוי 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 אוי, שיר למעלות, אשא עיני אל ההרים, אוי מאין יבוא עזרי, עזרי מעם השם, עושה שמיים וארץ, אל ייתן למות רגליך, אל ינום שומרך. אוי 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 אוי, שיר למעלות.